I want to start by asking you one question. If I told you that a financial crisis was quietly building in a market that touches nearly every single American household, not the stock market, not housing, not crypto, but the car market, would you believe me? Because the data right now is not subtle. Should you plan to buy, sell, or trade a car within the coming year or so, the details ahead might just keep thousands in your pocket. What comes next shifts how value adds up when wheels change hands. Timing plays quiet tricks on price tags, especially when moves feel rushed. A few overlooked signals often shape whether cash flows out fast or stays put. Hidden patterns emerge once you see past surface numbers. Real savings hide where most glance over without pause. 5 clear warning signs have appeared in the car industry lately. Right now, we're looking at every single one using up-to-date facts. The picture most news outlets paint about vehicles doesn't match what statistics actually say. See how they differ. Right now makes more sense once you glance at how things began. Roots of this mess took hold during 2020 and 2021, yet effects are just becoming clear. Cars used to be simpler to buy before everything changed. A person would step into a dealership, talk directly with a salesperson, while buyers often managed to pay less than the listed amount. This felt ordinary. It stayed that way for years without shifting. Out of nowhere, within just a year and a half, everything turned inside out. Car makers cut output fast. Demand looked shaky, while a worldwide lack of computer chips wrecked parts networks. Right then, government payments filled U.S. wallets and people suddenly wanted vehicles like never before. Record hunger for autos crashed into the weakest availability in decades. What followed stood unmatched in the business. In early 2022, most people buying cars in the U.S. ended up spending more than the listed price. About 4 out of every 5 shoppers paid above MSRP. One example stood out. A Ford Bronco listed online for $83,000. It started at just $38,000. The difference, $45,000 extra added on top. But here's the thing, scenes like that weren't rare anymore. This kind of pricing had become normal. And that brings me directly to warning sign number 1. The full weight of those pandemic-era purchase prices is now landing on millions of American households all at the same time, and it is quietly devastating them financially. Here is the chain reaction that happened. Banks loosened their lending standards in 2021 to stimulate the economy, meaning loans were going out to buyers who frankly weren't in a position to sustain them. People bought cars at inflated prices with inflated loan amounts at what were then historically low interest rates. That combination felt manageable in the moment, but the moment didn't last. Today, the average new car transaction price sits at $49,353, according to Kelley Blue Book, a figure that is 30% higher than it was before the pandemic in early 2020. And because car values have been steadily falling back toward earth while loan balances have not, millions of owners are now holding a financial time bomb they didn't see coming. That is the second warning sign, and honestly the one that I think is most alarming on an individual level. Negative equity, owing more on your car loan than the car is actually worth, has exploded to levels not seen since before the pandemic. According to the most recent data from Edmunds, in the fourth quarter of 2025, 3% of trade-ins toward new car purchases carried negative equity. That is nearly 1 in 3. And the average amount those owners were underwater, $7,214, an all-time record high. It gets worse. More than a quarter of those underwater trade-ins carried more than $10,000 in negative equity, also a record. And here is what the data shows about people who try to solve this problem by rolling that negative equity into a new loan. Their average monthly payment hits $916 per month. That is $144 more per month than the average new car buyer. Over a 5-year term, that is $8,640 in extra payments just to carry debt from your last car into your next one. It becomes a cycle that gets harder and harder to escape. Edmunds' data actually shows that 40.7% of purchases involving negative equity are now being financed on 84-month loans, 7 years, just to make the monthly number feel manageable. But a 7-year loan almost guarantees that the owner will be underwater again when it comes time to trade in. The cycle perpetuates itself, and the broader financial pressure on car owners doesn't stop at the loan. The average annual car insurance premium in the United States has now climbed to $2,638 in 2025, representing a 12% increase from just the year before, according to Bankrate. When you stack today's average new car payment of $772 per month on top of insurance, plus fuel, plus maintenance, you are looking at well over $1,000 a month in total transportation costs for a single vehicle for a growing number of Americans. That is not a sustainable budget for most families. Here's the third red flag. It ought to trigger panic buttons everywhere in finance. Delinquency rates on car loans are now higher than they were during the worst days of the last crash. Take a moment to absorb that fact. In early 2025, reports show loans overdue by at least 2 months climbed to 1.38%, beating the previous high of 1.33% set back in 2009 when everything fell apart. Meanwhile, borrowers with poor credit missed payments more often, hitting 6.6% in January alone, worse than any year since records started nearly 30 years ago. Here's what stands out most. Auto loans are now the shakiest form of borrowing across the country, apart from student debt, according to VantageScore's top economist. That shift surprises many. For decades, those loans held a reputation for stability. Borrowers rarely missed payments when it came to vehicles. It's different now. Savings built up during the pandemic have mostly disappeared. Paychecks stretch less than they used to. Balances on credit cards keep climbing, hitting levels never seen before. Those under the most pressure tend to come from loans taken between 2021 and 2023, minus the ones who bought homes when prices soared thanks to easier borrowing rules. Now here is where the picture shifts from a consumer debt story to an industry story, and that is warning sign number 4. Inventory at U.S. dealerships is elevated and has been for well over a year. As of October 2025, there were 2.83 million new vehicles sitting unsold on dealer lots across the country, according to Cox Automotive. The days supply of new inventory, a key industry metric, set at 77 days in September 2025, compared to a low of around 18 days at the height of the pandemic shortage in 2022. To put that in plain terms, there are now roughly 4 times as many unsold cars sitting on lots today as there were just 3 years ago. Certain brands are sitting on particularly severe inventory backlogs, and manufacturers are having to increase incentives, now running at 7.7% of average transaction prices on average, just to keep vehicles moving. Out here, actions speak louder than words. Lately, major car makers like Stellantis, Ford, Nissan, and Volkswagen have let go of thousands of factory employees, spreading out across nearly a year and a half. Take Nissan, once a steady runner-up among Japanese manufacturers, now stumbling hard. When its earnings tanked plus merger hopes with Honda vanished around 2025, it left the company scrambling without clear direction. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, BMW, Mercedes, and VW together absorbed roughly $6 billion and hit not just setbacks but direct results of shifting U.S. trade rules during that same period. When companies with that kind of history and that kind of capital are struggling to operate independently, it is not a one-off story. It is a sign that something structural is broken. And now we come to the 5th warning sign, the one that arrived this year and has the potential to fundamentally change the trajectory of everything we've discussed. On April 3rd, 2025, a 25% tariff on all vehicles imported into the United States officially took effect. Tariffs on auto parts followed in May. The scale of what this touches is enormous. In 2024, 3.6 million vehicles were built in Canada and Mexico alone, including major consumer favorites like the Chevy Silverado, the Ram 1500, and the Ford Maverick. Another 3.7 million were imported from Japan, Korea, and the European Union. According to Kelley Blue Book, the average new vehicle transaction price jumped 2.5% between just March and April of this year, more than double the typical monthly increase of 1.1%. JP Morgan has projected that non-compliant vehicles could see price increases of up to 19% by mid-year. Some European car makers like BMW and Mercedes recently pointed out that making specific models for America might not pay off anymore under today's tariffs. That situation could push prices up or lead to dropping those cars entirely, minus both outcomes make it harder for someone looking for a budget-friendly option. Whether costs rise or choices shrink, the result feels much the same from behind the wheel. What happens next might depend on something else going on right now. You have buyers who are already stretched by record loan balances and record insurance costs. You have 5% of auto loans already delinquent. You have dealers sitting on nearly 3 million unsold vehicles. And now you are adding tariffs that are pushing prices up in a market where buyers can barely afford the prices that already exist. It is a collision of forces that should not be happening simultaneously, and yet here we are. So what does all of this mean if you are a real person making a real decision about a car right now? A few things are worth understanding clearly. If you are currently underwater on an auto loan, meaning you owe more than your car is worth, the single most damaging move you can make right now is to trade that car in and roll the negative equity into a new loan. The math on that decision will follow you for years. The data shows the average person doing exactly that pays $8,640 more over their next loan term, finances $11,453 more than a typical buyer, and has a higher likelihood of being underwater again at their very next trade-in. If you can hold the vehicle, make the payments, and wait until you reach positive equity, that is almost always the more financially sound path. If you are in the market to buy and you do genuinely need a vehicle, this environment actually does have one silver lining. Dealer incentives are at their highest level in years and inventory is ample. Dealers need to move cars. The negotiating leverage that disappeared entirely between 2021 and 2023 is back in the buyer's seat now. But be thoughtful about your total cost of ownership. Run the numbers on insurance before you commit. Look hard at the loan term and the interest rate. A vehicle that fits your monthly budget on a 7-year loan may cost you dramatically more in total interest than one you can finance over 4 or 5 years and keep you underwater far longer. The car market right now is navigating a perfect storm. Record negative equity, delinquencies above Great Recession levels, industry layoffs, elevated inventory, and tariff-driven price increases arriving into a market that was already unaffordable for a growing share of Americans. Whether this resolves in a dramatic price correction or simply grinds through years of slow normalization, nobody knows with certainty. But what the data tells you clearly is that this is not a normal market. And making a major financial decision in an abnormal market without understanding what is driving it is a risk you do not have to take. Now, here is what I want to know from you in the comments. Are you currently underwater on your car loan, or do you know someone who is? Because the data says nearly 1 in 3 of you watching this probably is, and I want to hear what that experience is actually like on the ground. And if you want to go deeper on the one number that determines whether you're actually in a position to buy a car right now, and most people get this number completely wrong, that video is coming up next. If this breakdown was useful to you, hit subscribe before you go. I cover this kind of data regularly, and the next